Hello, and welcome to Look Ahead Now. Today, we are excited to explore the topic of entrepreneurship as a career opportunity for engineering professionals. We're privileged to present a power-packed masterclass from Hirok Mukherjee on this subject. Hirok is a seasoned tech business advisor and investment banker with over 30 years of global experience. He's been mentoring startups and other companies to achieve entrepreneurial success. It's nice to have you with us today on this session where we look further at the idea of future of core engineering careers.
Hi Vijay, good to meet you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing good. So we recently, if you recall, we had a lovely conversation where I was introducing you to our teacher on core engineering careers, and you had a very interesting remark which led to this conversation, and that was that why are engineering professionals, why shouldn't they be looking at entrepreneurship as a career? And as an entrepreneurship coach and an entrepreneur and an investor, I thought we should hear it from you and take this conversation further as to why engineers can look at this as a entrepreneurship as a career, and how can they go about doing that. So would you like to share your thoughts on that? And then
Sure. So firstly, thank you very much for having me in the show. And look, entrepreneurship is very close to my heart. And as far as engineering professions go, and let's at the very onset segregate technology and engineering. So when we talk about engineering, we're talking about the core engineering disciplines like electrical engineering, mechanical, civil, chemical, material science, metallurgy, electronics, so on and so forth. We are not talking about computer science and computer science related work. So that's number one. Second, why is it important? And there are two answers. One is entrepreneurship is important for any society, for any country, for any economy, because the way economies grow is only through entrepreneurship. And that's what creates jobs, that's what creates opportunity, wealth, well-being, etc. That's important. Number two is, why is it that engineering professionals should actively sort out entrepreneurial opportunities? And there are multiple reasons for that as well. Number one, they are trained in core areas which impact life, society, country. All right. We live in houses, civil engineers build it, architects help design it. Those houses, you have electricity. Electrical engineers actually come up with the design of that, right from generation to distribution to the last mile. We communicate using phones, use computers, television. Electronics engineers are the ones who are actually involved in that. Industry, pretty much all industry uses chemical processes, process instrumentation, which comes from the chemtech guys. And in today's world, and maybe going forward in this session, we may find some time to talk about it. One of the biggest areas in the world, across the world, in every country, which is getting impacted is this whole subject of material science and metallurgy. Materials engineering is changing human life and human existence like nothing before. And therefore, engineers are, one, trained to be able to do that. And number two, even if they are not in that core area, they are trained through analytical thinking and analytical design skills to be able to break down entrepreneurship and business into those small things and take things forward. And that's the reason why I think engineering graduates should very actively seek out entrepreneurial opportunities.
great. So you've laid out a very nice framework where you're pointing out that there is both talent and opportunity in abundance today, and there is a lot of transformation happening in the world where engineers, core engineers in particular, play a very critical role at the very foundation or the very basic part of those transformations that are happening. whether it's material science or telecom. And so, when I look at it, and if I were to put myself in the shoes of a mechanical uh, or an electrical, how should I go? And say, okay, it is very nice that somebody told me this, and I'm getting these inputs from everywhere. How do I actually go about ideating? I can't just sit, in a chair and say, okay, let me come up with the business. So much as you want to do that, and do I harness my technical expertise somewhere in that ideation process? So this is a very mysterious element, and probably the most important element uh, of the process. One of them. So could you elaborate on this? How to start the ideation?
So before I get into the ideation process, let me also try and lay out the two different types of entrepreneurship. One is what we call entrepreneurship or an entrepreneur, and the two is what we call a technopreneur. All right. And there is a very big difference between the two. What's the difference? Let us say you're a mechanical engineer. All right. However, you have an idea that, selling men's garments is a great business. Fashion and garments and wearables are very tuned to women. Fashion designers cater to them. Haute couture is focused on women. Most stylized products are for women. Very little for men, apart from normal shirts and all. But you think that there is a huge market to bring forward and sell fashion garments for men. Now, you're a mechanical engineer, you've got nothing to do with either fashion or garment technology or anything, but it's just an idea. So that's entrepreneurship. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with what you've learned in school, but you're simply using your analytical abilities, you're using your problem solving abilities, you're using your mathematical abilities to break down the business into small bits, cater to it, etc. So that's entrepreneurship. The other is technopreneurship, which is where it is connected to what you've actually trained for. So if you're a mechanical engineer, you may suddenly come up with a design idea, which is a better pump, all right, or a bit better motor, or a better engine for automotives. And these days there is a lot of that work going on in the original ICE engines, which is internal combustion engines, the hydrogen engines and electrical vehicle engines, so on and so forth. So firstly, it's important to understand these two differences: entrepreneurial abilities and technopreneurial abilities. So that's number one. Second is, how do you ideate? So either an idea comes to you, and in a lot of cases we see that for entrepreneurial abilities, it's just an idea which has come to someone. In the technopreneurial space, that idea usually comes from some little experience of working in a particular area, finding challenges within that, and coming up with an idea to focus on that challenge. And by the way, that is precisely pretty much how core technology products are also kind of built. But that's where the role of an entrepreneurial mentor plays a part. Remember, 95% of most startup companies fail, not because the idea was good or the idea was not good, or there was no money, there was no people, etc., because there's a lack of validation. You have an idea, you got something, but that doesn't sell because that's not what is required, right? And that's where experience comes into play, and that's where the role of a good mentor comes into play, who could help the entrepreneur or the technopreneur take them through that journey and show them whether that what they are building really has a validated business case or not. And there are many ways of doing it, but it's very, very important to do that. So ideation and validation kind of go hand in hand, where entrepreneurs and technopreneurs need to figure out whether the probability of success with what they are thinking is higher than the threshold.
So that's very interesting. I thought maybe it's worth emphasizing, and if probably digging in further, if there is a little bit more in that. Uh, so, when I asked you how do you ideate, what you essentially said is that you can be an entrepreneur or a technopreneur. In our case, we're talking of engineering, core engineering professionals who might be looking at the technopreneur. If so, then you said, okay, depending on your area of expertise, technical expertise, you might find opportunities that build a better engine, better transformer, better antenna. And it's not enough to just think on those lines. What do you do next? And that was the question, right? And you said you need somebody who can help you validate. Validation is the next step. And in that, you added this, between the idea and the validation, you added this important element called a mentor or experience, which is something that you may not have because you have not done it before. Therefore, that mentor brings that value to your further thinking on the process. So could we then say that ideation doesn't end with the first idea? So you come up with the idea, and let's say I'm an electronics engineer. I came up with an idea to build an antenna for a 6G mobile device, which is not yet come up. You go with that idea and you find a mentor. So what would typically happen? Could you take us through some basic steps?
I'll actually give you some examples, or one example, and specifically from this electronics manufacturing space. And this is a space which is booming now, the entire electronic manufacturing. So here comes an entrepreneur, and they believe that the EMS space is booming, and they would like to build a few products, and those products are in the wearable and hearable space, which is smart bands and smart watches, and these earphones and wireless earphones, etc., etc. And the industry has different micro players. Some of them are called OEMs, some of them are called ODM, original design and manufacturers. Some of them are called electronic manufacturing services company. Some of them are called contracted electronic manufacturing services company, etc. And that's all great. And there are maybe Taiwanese collaboration partners who are very actively seeking out Indian partners to start such manufacturing in India.
We're seeing Foxconn making waves all over the country.
Yes. And pretty much the entire spectrum of Taiwanese ODMs today, they are looking at India and are scouting for partners locally to start manufacturing within India as a geopolitical risk management principle. So, but what's the problem? So when that entrepreneur came to me and we had a look at it, we realized that the financial case has just a 7% EBITDA margin at the best case. Now, at a 7% EBITDA margin grounds up, the cost of interest and the cost of running simply erodes all that. And if there is a certain amount of delay in realization of the assets or the recovery, then the entire business would be under financial duress, right?
So I may want to, just for the sake of people who don't understand that terminology, EBITDA, you can understand, is simply the difference between your income and your expense. The first
earnings, yes, earnings before interest, payout, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That's the gross.
Yeah, I was just simplifying it for.
Thank you. And I think yes, very important.
So
when you look at that picture, it's a totally different picture. It's not a picture which is born out of a dream. It's not a picture which is born out of aspiration or capability or anything. It's a very cut and dry financial picture which shows that at this scale, this simply doesn't make sense. And therefore, what does make sense is to start with a different business model altogether. Okay, have those tie-ups, but become a distribution partner to start off, create the cash flow, build the balance sheet, and then take the next step of manufacturing. Slightly longer term realization of the same goals, but a financially more prudent way to achieve the same goal. All right. So this is a classical example where a mentor can help fine tune the thinking process and the going forward process for an entrepreneur to be successful.
So in this case, since we are using this example, you also first validated their basic business premise of the solution or the process in this case that they were offering as a business, which is
Absolutely. So we first took a look at what they were planning to make, and also took a look at what's the market all about. And remember, here there are two spaces. One is the business to consumer space, and the other is the business to business space. In electronic manufacturing space, if you are making smart bands and audio equipment, etc., that's mostly business to consumer space. The way you validate that is through broader market data and statistics and all of that. Whereas you could also make active electronics components like 5G routers and 6G Wi-Fi routers and distribution hubs, etc., which the telecommunication companies and the broadband companies would actively look at, and that's a business to business space. And the way you validate that is more of a personal, institutionalized basis, where you actually go and speak to people saying that, look, is there a net demand of all these products? Would you buy from me if I were to be able to supply you these products? Two different ways of validation, but very important to understand the product, kind of do an assessment of the market and the demand, the net demand. There is a difference between demand and net demand. I mean, you got a fitness band. You're not going to be in any kind of hurry to buy the second fitness band. So there is no net demand coming from you. But it could so be that your children who see that, look, you got a fitness band and that's really cool and works well and gets you a lot of data, they may just go and want to buy one. So that's the net demand. So some of these things are very important to understand.
so. Again, since we are on the subject of entrepreneurship and you explained the mentorship model, maybe we can just add an element that the value chain of the business model, where you have first the idea, and then you have the product or solution, and then you validate the entire business model, including possibly the other elements which we did touch upon. How will you go to market? How will you distribute it? How will you service the product? What will be your logistics? So you complete that value chain. So this is a very good snapshot of how somebody with experience may help the entrepreneur to become more successful and reduce the chances of failure, because entrepreneurship is a high risk business. So that brings us to the next question, money, because entrepreneurship is all about investment, and without funds you can't create a business. And from what we know, there are two reasons you need money. You need money also to take care of your own personal expenses, and you need money to invest in the business. So typically an engineer working in a large firm taking this step would have limited resources, financial resources. By limited, I don't mean that they are nothing, but they may not have enough to invest into setting up a factory or hiring people and build something from scratch. So this process of starting from nothing, which we call bootstrap, right, which everybody knows today, thanks to the startup environment, it's become a popular common thing. So when you bootstrap this, what are the strategies that this technocrat entrepreneur should look at when they first take the very first step of saying, okay, now I have quit my job and I am going to start doing this project, this venture?
Fair enough. Good question. So before addressing the finance issues, let me also kind of outline one more interesting thought. If we all know that the technology entrepreneurship space is very well developed, the engineering or the other entrepreneurship space is not that developed in terms of startup culture. Right?
Yes.
The moment we talk about a startup, the first thing that comes into our mind is something to do with
IT
computers.
related. Yes.
However, because of that development, there are some very interesting tools which are available, and those tools uh, are used oftentimes to pitch to venture capitalists, to pitch to investors, etc. But what those tools do is they give you, the entrepreneur, a very clear and precise view of your own entrepreneurial effort. It asks you in one small box in 3 statements what your product is all about, what problem does it solve, what's the competition, how big is the market, what's your team, what's your unique sales points, what's your differentiator, what's your IP, what's your go-to-market strategy, are you environment friendly, what's the financial forecast, etc., etc., all in one summary. And I have seen it many times from my experience that entrepreneurs who actually do a diligently good job of using one such tool to create a pitch for themselves really knows the stuff that they're doing. Now, just because it's a technology or a IT related product doesn't mean that it is any different from an engineering product. You could probably build a new transformer, which is a product, which is as good as writing a new software code which solves a certain problem, which is also a product. The only difference is that's a software product and this is a hard product. That's the only difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But those are products solving particular problems and generating wealth and economy. Therefore, the first thing I encourage all entrepreneurs in the engineering space is to take some of these tools and apply it to their situation. They will get a much better understanding of where they stand. So that's number one. Now let's talk about bootstrapping and money. Yes, for every kind of organization, when it starts and from the beginning, it requires some bootstrapping, but there are many different models available, and I'll give some examples. If you are a chemical engineer, chem tech background, and you've come up with a new process of, let's say, converting plastic and plastic waste into useful products, could be biochar, could be energy, could be oil, and I believe that there are many such techniques available in chemical engineering space, things like pyrolysis and all of that, which you can do that. And you've come up with this. Now, do you have the money to set up a huge plant to do that? No. Do you have the wherewithal to go and collect such plastic waste? No. Is there any bank who's going to extend that amount of loan to you? No. Then what do? Do you give it up? No. There are different models. One such model is you could actually go to larger companies in that space and collaborate with them. And that collaboration is possible today. I have seen a similar collaboration in the space of, and I was talking about material science earlier. You may know that the construction industry is one of the biggest polluters in the world because of cement. Cement as a product is one of the biggest polluters because the carbon emission is massive. And there are a couple of people who are from material science background and materials engineering. They've been able to engineer what is called green cement, which cuts down carbon emission by 79%. But how do you create a cement plant? It's an expensive capex, capital expenditure, huge capital outlay. So you can't. So what do? You go to a large chemical company like a Holcim and say that, hey, look, I have created this product, it's my IP. I don't have the money to do it, but would you be interested in collaborating with me? And they will say yes, because it's good for the society. At some point in time, regulators are going to come and say that for environment's sake, I want to move to green cement totally. So yes, I will back you. And I will either help you manufacture it in one part of my plant, or set up a new plant. I'm not going to eat into everything that you have. My requirement is that pretty much most of your production I will buy out. Works perfectly well for everybody. Starts off. Once it starts off, it gets traction. And once it gets traction, there is success. And that's when funds come in. Maybe impact funds come in first. And it's a true case. I know of an entrepreneur who's based out of France and Dublin, and they came out with this green cement, and one of the large cement companies started off with them. And then the first fund which came in was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which funded them big time. And then came the private equities, and now they have 4 cement plants on their own in Western Europe.
So
But
that
this
is,
one guy,
again, it's worth just again clarifying for the sake of some of our friends there who may not have understood or heard the word impact for the first time. What Hirak is talking here is there are many types of funding opportunities, and one very important type of funding entity is what is called a social entrepreneurship fund, or a fund that does not look immediately for high returns, but would like to have returns, but would like to invest in ventures that impact society meaningfully and positively. So, and often it's nice you pointed it out, because that's not known to most people.
yes,
And a lot of ideas, especially for engineers, would come from making life better for the world. So if there was one cohort of people who could seek funding from impact investors, it would be core engineers. And as you said, I have also come across great ideas which have gone into that route of funding. I may also add, and I've been thanks
sure.
to your short masterclass, I got motivated to suggest something, which is in addition to the idea you suggested that you work and set up a plant inside a plant, or use their technology to build something, but also license your technology, right? Where without spending a penny, the intellectual property is licensed in
Absolutely.
India to X civil cement company and in China to Y, and make a good business model out of that.
Excellent point, and brings us back to what we discussed when we started on this thread, that look at the technology entrepreneurship space and look at the tools. So one of the biggest go-to-market tools for the technology industry is licensing IP, software licenses, right? Platform as a service, which is a more evolved form of licensing. So it's not a compartmentalized view. Everybody can learn from each other, and these days, increasingly, in some core areas of engineering like electronics, there is a lot of interplay which has restarted. And for people who've done electronics engineering, there are great opportunities which is coming up even in chip designing, something as esoteric, specialized, and niche as chip designing. Earlier, we used to have on one motherboard, printed circuit board, you had different electronic components, all right, doing different things. Today's concept is that most of those different components have gone into one single integrated chip, and that's called SoC, system on a chip. The entire system is now on a chip instead of being on a motherboard. On top of that, they are borrowing some fundamentals from the computer science industry and embedding some software inside those chips. And they have now progressed where they can embed machine learning algorithms on those chips. And those are very application specific machine learning algorithms. And they call it MLSoC, machine learning system on a chip. And this is completely the domain of electronics engineers. And this is a space which is booming. There's a lot of fiscal and non-fiscal, financial and non-financial inspiration and motivation coming in from the government of India in doing all of these things. And if there are people who are technically equipped to do this, have the aspirations, should take this plunge, because it's something extremely big for the future and for the society and the country.
That's a very enthusiastic and I think very positive point you made, because there is a great deal of opportunity right now in this country, and in fact, there is a lot of demand for many things, and there are not enough people to satisfy those demands. So, if ever there was a time, this is the time to step forward and be an entrepreneur in many ways. So, as we wind down to the last part of our conversation, the topic now is okay, this is what is a reality check. It's all nice and we're all brimming with ideas. But what are the challenges that I expect to face? And therefore, how should I plan so that I can grow sustainably in the venture that I've started and don't fall flat on my face? What do you talk about? Challenges and how to plan?
So challenges, we can divide the challenges in two phases. Phase 1 is up to launch. Phase 2 is post and beyond launch. Challenges remain the same, but kind of change in their perspective. So what is it up to launch? We've discussed some of this already. How do you do ideation? Once you've done the ideation, how do you do validation of that ideation? And once the validation is done, how do you do a proof of concept? Very important to do a proof of concept. And from this point onwards, there are a lot of these technology incubators and accelerators which come into play. And when I say technology, I'm not just referring to IT or computer science. I'm also referring to other engineering skills. There are specialized accelerators as well. For example, there are incubators and accelerators who only focus on biological engineering. So if and that's a fairly new area. So if you're from, let's say, biophysics or biomedical engineering or biological engineering, and you have ideas, and I've known of a few such very successful products where they came out with mechanism, sensor-based mechanism to check blood sugar levels non-invasively. What is invasive? You prick the top of your finger, collect the blood, and put it inside that small little machine, and it tells you this is your blood sugar. But that's invasive. Non-invasive is you could actually measure it from your teardrops. You could actually measure it from your breath markers. I knew of a very interesting startup company from the biological engineering side, where the promoter, she was a doctoral student of biotechnology, and she figured out that the biomarkers in the breath, you could analyze those biomarkers chemically and start predicting the onset of breast and cervical cancer. That was her product all about, very specialized, was incubated and accelerated by the venture center in Pune, which is one of the best venture incubation centers for biological and chemical engineering work. And I could give you many such examples, which I had the privilege and opportunity to oversee when I was associated with them for some time. So validation and then proof of concept. And once that is done, then the entire plan to launch. What's the go-to market? How are you going to launch this particular product? So up to that is the phase of challenge 1. And then the challenge 2 is
So in challenge 1, if you were to point out the most frequent problem or issue that would arise, is there any one thing?
POC.
Proof of concept.
POC. Primarily because you may have the idea and the attributes of your product in your mind or even on a blueprint. But if you don't have the experience, okay, it's not necessary that as an engineer, you may have the capabilities of design, which you've even got it down to a blueprint, but you still may not have the expertise to convert that blueprint into a working prototype. Okay, because those skills are also needed. So in most cases, the prototype on the minimum viable product is where the biggest
So
challenge
in phase one, it's the
lies.
prototyping or proof of concept that is.
That
So
is true.
now, please carry forward.
So once it is launched, then the second phase of challenge is that how do you test the efficacy of your go-to-market plan? How efficiently is the go-to-market happening? Efficiency not only means how fast it's scaling. The second part is the cash flow comfortable? Because if you are cash trapped at that point in time, no matter how great a go-to-market plan you have, it is not going to get the fuel to burn the engine and move forward. And therefore, the challenges there is the interaction between your marketing and business and the finance. And that's where the combination of your team structure comes into play, where a lot of experience needs to come in play, where these two are managed well till such time it receives adequate traction in the market to automatically attract investments coming in to take it big. Okay, so that's the challenge in that phase, unless of course we have been able to structure it alternatively, where we are maybe working with a larger company on this, or have worked with a foundation on this, so on and so forth.
So,
If
like you are
those
the
alternate
strategic
structures,
partner very early on, so they can mitigate the
that's right.
cash flow risks. Okay.
That's right. Yes.
So, just a couple of more add-on questions to that. In the phase one part up to proof of concept, would one assume, therefore, that most of the money would come from you personally?
So a substantial amount of money would certainly come from you personally, but these days, given the advent of so many incubators and accelerators, and government incubators, government accelerators, institutional incubators, pretty much every engineering college has some form of an incubator. There is a lot of help which comes in from those quarters as well. So,
That's interesting. I want to ask you.
sure.
Sorry, because I will forget to ask you. So, I am a engineer. I passed out of college 6 years ago. Working. So even I could go back to my alma mater, my engineering college, and pitch for an incubator spot in their incubator. Would it be possible?
You could absolutely do that. You could certainly go back and have that conversation. Even business schools have incubators, and therefore, if you've even done a business degree, you could go back to your business school and do that. If neither, you could go to a third party and do that. Even sometimes I have seen where engineering institutions are actively seeking to incubate. You could actually go there. I'll give you another example. I have a very, very good friend, and he is not an engineer, he's a doctor. And he's one of the leading nephrologists, and he's one of the leading nephrologists in the world. He has 10 to 15,000 kidney transplant patients. And he is closer to my age. So he passed out his medicine at least 20 years back. So, but then he's come up with a new idea, and he wanted to create a low-cost, portable, domestic dialysis machine. Okay, but remember, he is a nephrologist. He's not an engineer, and this requires biological engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, a bit of chemical engineering for the chemical waste, and all of that. So when he and I were talking, I kind of told him that why don't you go and talk to the STEP, the incubator called STEP, which is in IIT Kharagpur. And I myself went and spoke to the incubator called SINE, SINE, which is in IIT Bombay. Both of them were more than happy to kind of collaborate with him to bring this product into fruition. He didn't go to either of these institutions because he's not an engineer, he's a doctor. And he's not a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old. He's a 50-year-old, very well established, etc. And while he did not require any external monetary aid, because he's very well established, yet through those incubators, the government of India's biotechnology and bioscience incubation fund, which funds up to 50 lakhs initial stage, came in, right? So point I'm trying to make is all these opportunities and the ecosystem exists. I am not saying that all these ecosystems can match the best in the world, but it's still a start and it exists, and there are ways to take help from it.
Great. I think that's you almost covered the entire framework of what to do and how to go about doing it. The very last question before we come to the end of this session. Are there any couple of things that you would advise people not to do, or is there a word of caution anywhere in this conversation?
Might sound a bit esoteric, but the first caution is ego. You do not do entrepreneurship because you're trying to prove a point to someone or yourself or anybody. Entrepreneurship is a very deep conviction within you about something that you want to do, which solves certain problem, can be monetized, and good for the economy, society, country, world, etc. So that's number one. Number two is the closeness for help. Oftentimes we think we know it all, or we know it 80% or 60%. We are living in times when the world of science and technology and engineering is changing so fast and newer things are coming in so fast that we need to be constantly in that mode to learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's very important. If we stop doing it or do not do it, then that's a recipe for disaster. So ego and not asking for adequate help are two absolute no-nos and big detrimentals to successful entrepreneurship.
Great. So an open-minded person with a lot of self-confidence, because ego comes from the ability to be confident of yourself, as a lack of it would be the ideal recipe for a good entrepreneur.
Absolutely. And you may have this lovely idea and you go to someone, mentor, and that mentor says that, yes, but you know, there is, if you change this idea a bit, maybe 20, 30%, that could be a better deal for you. And that's what we call pivoting.
Yeah.
And you could pivot at any point in time, but you should be open to pivoting, because it basically means that I am abandoning my original brainchild, which is my baby,
Yes.
and kind of open to accept a slightly transformed view of the world.
Wait. Or I have to give away 40% of the value of the business, which in the short term may look not so good, but you don't realize that it can.
As I keep telling everybody, 100% of zero
Still
is
zero.
infinitesimally smaller than 1% of 1 billion. So you choose what you want.
Correct. Great. So thanks, Virat, for taking us through this
My pleasure.
wonderful, short but very, very powerful, I would in fact call it a masterclass on entrepreneurship. Just to sort of round off whatever we discussed, just to summarize, you explained why entrepreneurship makes a good career idea for core engineering professionals, especially given today where India is bursting with opportunities in all sectors. And then you talked about how the ideation process is linked to finding somebody who can act as a mentor to help you take it up to a proof of concept stage. And that really is the most critical part of the first phase, if we may call it, business model, whose success or failure will be defined by the proof of concept. And then you went on to explain the second big pillar in this whole game, which is the financial part of it, where you explained how one can do it and how many different types of opportunities exist. And one can look at all those opportunities and be able to take it forward while being mindful that initially a lot of funding, both in cash and kind, have to come from the West, the original entrepreneur, through whatever means that he can. And you obviously concluded by by pointing out that you should keep aside your ego and have an open mind if you want to be a assistant. So I think that was phenomenally valuable, and I hope
Thank
a
you.
lot of our friends in the core engineering space and everybody else who's watching this as well will take inspiration. I may add that if you would like to touch base with Hirok and want to take his mentorship assistance, Hirok is listed on lookaheadnow.com and you can reach him there. And I'm sure he'll be able to help many budding entrepreneurs take their ideas forward. So thank you, Hirok, once again, and hope to catch up with you again soon on another part of this story.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Very happy to be on this show.